So what do Australians mean when they say alternative grape variety? Well, through one wine, this here, Bellwether's Tempranillo from Wrattonbully, we're going to find out. Wrattonbully is an area of South Australia, very close to Coonawarra, famous for its Cabernet Sauvignon, its Shiraz. Much better known than Wrattonbully. Wrattonbully tends to grow very good grapes, but those grapes get hidden away in blends of quite famous wines sometimes, and sometimes not so famous wines, along with another region just down the road called Pathaway as well. But Wrattonbully shares some of the great characteristics of Coonawarra, that slightly cooler climate you get on the limestone coast, but also the Terra Rossa limestone soils. And in recent years, Wrattonbully started to come into its own and be known for some pretty classy wines in its own right. And Sue Bell, who makes this Bellwether Ant Series Tempranillo, Sue's someone who knows a thing or two about Wrattonbully and Coonawarra in this area, because she spent quite a lot of her career working at bigger companies like Hardy's, Stonehaven, before branching out on her own in this little shearing shed just outside Coonawarra, where she set up her Bellwether winery and sourcing grapes from growers in Wrattonbully, in Coonawarra, further afield in Victoria, in Tasmania, and then bringing those grapes back to this little winery. And she created a range of wines called the Ant Series, of which the Tempranillo is such one. The Ant Series, it's based largely around alternative varieties, but it's sending a message about climate change, which is really important, particularly the Australian wine industry, which has vast regions under significant drought stress and vast areas which need significant irrigation, partly because they're planted to varieties that are very thirsty. So some of those traditional, well-known French varieties like Bordeaux, varieties like Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot, and things like Sauvignon Blanc and Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, those classic noble varieties. But then there are other varieties, Mediterranean varieties that are used to hotter climates around Europe and elsewhere in the world now, which are perhaps better suited. So that's one thing we think about as an alternative variety. The growth of alternative varieties in Australia is driven by a necessity to find varieties that are better suited to a hot and arid climate in a way that Cabernet Sauvignon, Sauvignon Blanc, it simply isn't. So that's number one, alternative varieties out of necessity, climate necessity. It's also partly out of taste. And Australians love their own wine. They love their domestic wines. They support them heavily. They're an incredibly patriotic wine country, and they're happy to pay good money for their own homegrown wines. However, everyone likes a varied palate, I think. So the new generation of wine drinkers in Australia do want to have something a little bit different, but they do also still want to drink local wines. So there is a movement behind things like Tempranillo, which we're drinking now. I should actually drink some, shouldn't I? And other varieties, things like Vermentino, which Sue also makes some of. There's another reason as well, which is partly down to migration. Over the second half of the 20th century, you had a lot of people move from Southern Europe and Southern and Eastern Europe to Australia, post-Second World War, World War II refugees, economic migrants, and setting up in Australia. And that meant you had vast communities of Italians, Greeks, Croatians, bring over varieties that they knew about from back at home. So whether that's the Prosecco growers in King Valley in Victoria, or people planting Sangiovese in the 1980s and so forth. So there's a lot of reasons why these varieties are there. But the reason why they're popular now is because people want that diversity, and the growers want to be growing these things because they're just better suited to the climate today in Australia. So that's what the Ant series that Sue makes represents. And her Tempranillo is probably my favourite of that whole series because it's planted in the right place. There's a lot of Tempranillo now being grown in Australia, to the point actually where Tempranillo almost isn't an alternative variety. It's so widely grown now. It often has its own shelf in a wine shop, in a bottle shop, rather than being lumped in with the alternatives. So Tempranillo you'll find in lots of places, Barossa or McLaren Vale as well. But Tempranillo, at its best, it wants a cooler climate. It wants it wants more acidity If you think of the best Tempranillo from Rioja, it tends to come from higher altitudes, in places like Rioja Alta and Rioja Alavesa. It tends to come from limestone-based soils. You don't find that in somewhere like McLaren Vale, necessarily. McLaren Vale is a patchwork of different terroirs, so you do find all sorts of things there, but it's quite hot. So is Barossa. Wrattonbully has those limestone soils, and it's that bit cooler. That's why Cabernet works well in Coonawarra, just down the road. So you've got perfect conditions for recreating some of the best elements of Tempranillo in Spain, where it came from, in Wrattonbully. Combine that with a really, really good winemaker. Sue was named Australia's Winemaker of the Year in 2014, and a great farmer who Sue has worked with for years and who allows her pretty good control over, when she picks her grapes, and that's crucial. Because you've got a wine here that's 13.5%, which for Australian red, even from Wrattonbully and Coonawarra, is pretty good going. But it's also got acidity. It's also got freshness. It's smooth. It's got a little kiss of eucalypt, which you get from those Coonawarra Shirazes and Cabernets. But it's got such an effortless, silky classiness to it that reminds me of some of my favourite Rioja, but without that hit of American or French oak. Because while this goes into barrel, it's not oaked. It's old, it's neutral barrel. So it's just giving it that micro-oxygenation during the winemaking process and the aging process to soften this wine out. 2017 vintage, spent a few years in bottle. It's absolutely delicious. So this is Bellwether Wrattonbully Tempranillo from Sue's Ant series. It's an alternative variety. It's not alternative taste. It's delicious. Cheers and happy Easter.